Before we get started, I want to address the passing of Golden Blue Dude. Now, if you've managed to stumble upon my small YouTube channel, you've in all likelihood already come across Golden Blue Dude and his content. He was a Mountaineer fan that talked Big 12 and all conference realignment, and really was even a motivating factor for me to add conference realignment content to my channel. And even the thumbnail for today's video, I would say, has elements of his thumbnails included in it. So I just want to send my condolences to his family and friends and fans, and anybody that has not watched his videos, isn't familiar with it. I will have a link to his channel in the description for this video, so you can go check it out and remember and honor him in that way. And as we go forward, let's all just try to have thick skin like Chris. And Golden Blue Dude, this one's for you. With Florida State and Clemson recently expressing dissatisfaction with the current ACC TV deal and the amount of revenue it's bringing in comparison to the other major conferences, there has been a lot of speculation at the potential of them getting out of the ACC, and if that is the case, that perhaps the conference gets raided. And so I've seen so many videos and breakdowns of speculation and everyone trying to guess where certain teams would end up in all this realignment, and which would spur a whole new round of realignment. And so today we are going to go through and take our best stab at this. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Jersey Score, the channel where we like to rate and debate team uniforms and logos, but we also do a lot with college realignment. So please be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content. Now today, getting into what could happen with the ACC if teams are able to find a way out of their grant of rights. Now, I don't know if this is possible. I've heard conflicting things when I've watched things and read things online, but I kind of feel like where there's a will, where there's enough money, there always seems to be a way. So it seems like it could be a possibility. Now, the thought of another major conference getting poached and perhaps dying off or getting kind of relegated down to another group of five type status does not really excite me. I think realignment is super interesting and it's fun to follow, but I also am a fan of having the more regional conferences. But I think we all see the writing on the wall that it's only a matter of time as these bigger, larger conferences continue to add more brands to continue to increase their revenue and continue to separate them from the rest of college football. So having said all that, let's take a look at what could potentially happen if the ACC grant of rights does go away and if the conference does get raided. So here's the ACC as it currently stands. And it's often speculated that Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, because they're big brand names and well within the SEC footprint, and they really feel more like SEC teams, that's where they would go. Now, I've seen more things recently, like on Locked On, probably Seminoles. It was the Florida State Locked On channel I stumbled upon, and they were both split on whether they wanted to see SEC or Big Ten. I've seen something else about potential of Clemson going to Big Ten. So really anything's on the table, which is part of what makes this exercise impossible to predict. But let's go with this because that's often where they're thought of, although Miami could easily be pushed out because the other Florida programs don't want them to be on the same footing. But for the sake of argument, let's go with this because this is often what we see. Big Ten, on the other hand, I think would go after Notre Dame, Virginia, North Carolina, and to keep Duke with them. And now I've also seen UNC and UVA linked to the SEC, but to me, I think they feel a lot more like Big Ten schools, very academic and strong, at least in terms of basketball. And then Notre Dame, we all know that the Big Ten has coveted them forever, and yes, they want to stay independent, but I'll get into that in a moment. And so to add a fourth program as a traveling partner with the other three to the SEC, it really could be any number of candidates. Could be Virginia Tech. I'm going with NC State, and so that leaves the conference pretty well torn apart at that point. That I think the Big 12 is in pretty good standing, could come in and grab a few programs for itself. So if this were to happen, this would leave only three programs behind without an obvious home. Syracuse felt like a potential candidate for the Big Ten once upon a time, but they elected to go with Rutgers instead. And then BC does get you into Boston, but it doesn't feel like they are big enough, and they really haven't done much in basketball or football for a while. And Wake Forest seems like it could be a potential fit for either the Big Ten or the SEC, but both conferences already have kind of a nerdy gold and black school in the program, and so I'm not sure Wake Forest is really needed or what value they bring. But before we move on, can we just take a moment to admire the new uniforms for Vanderbilt? So that brings us to the Big East. That could be a potential home for those three schools. Regionally, it fits. Syracuse and Boston College used to be in the Big East. They'd all have to figure out something to do with their football programs, but perhaps they could get together with UConn, who's an independent, and Villanova, who's trying to grow their football. At least they were. I don't know what happened with that. And perhaps other Big East members, or there's other schools out there that they could unite together and start a new conference for football only. So there are some options, but that would look pretty bleak for those schools. So here's what the Big Ten would look like with these schools from the ACC. I don't think that they would leave the LA schools out on an island. So I think they would continue to add from the pack, including Cal and Stanford, and just really round that out and create kind of a West Wing there. And they all fit culturally. They help academically. And I know Cal and Stanford don't add as much in terms of athletics, but that might be a plus for all the existing Big Ten members who don't want even stiffer competition, make it even harder on themselves to succeed. So I think this would really position the Big Ten very strongly. And another option that they would have is also going after Kansas potentially from the Big 12. And I know this puts them at 25, but let's say maybe UVA or doesn't, they leave them behind, or perhaps they don't get Notre Dame. So either way, this would again give them kind of another team that's a bridge to the West and another really strong basketball program. So if you look at this is definitely the strongest academic conference in terms of the power conferences. Their football is probably not quite where the SEC is, but it's right up there with them. And in terms of basketball, I would say at this point, especially if they stole Kansas, could call themselves the best basketball conference. And so think about it. You could have a night where you're playing Kansas and Indiana, Michigan State, Duke, and UNC, UCLA, and those are all in-conference games. So you'd have quite the lineup there. Getting back to Notre Dame, though, so I think, yes, they like their independence, and it would be tough to get them in, but if they saw everything going towards these super conferences, they might see the writing on the wall. Also, most of their major rivals would now be in conference or in the Big Ten, and so that would be another incentive. They'd be losing some of their independence, yes, but they'd be getting more in terms of money, and they would still be able to play most of their rivals in conference. You look at Michigan, Purdue. They would then have USC and Stanford, Penn State, Michigan State. And this could actually be an argument for the Big Ten to add Miami, which does not feel like a Big Ten school, but it is a huge brand, and it gets them into Florida. So that would be another potential. And we know that Miami, while they have struggled in terms of football as of late, it's a program with a lot of history of success there, and they're on the rise, it seems like. And then basketball, obviously, they're in the Final Four now. They've always been able to put together good basketball. So that could make a lot of sense too. But so the Big Ten certainly has its options ahead of it, and kind of probably, yes, they're competing with the SEC, but probably have kind of their pick at the litter. And another thing about this is look at these major rivalries all in conference. Yes, Michigan, Ohio State, we already know they're adding UCLA and USC. And then to add Duke and UNC, that is another reason why I really think that those two would want to stay together, because at this day and age, we're losing a lot of the regionality that having those rivalries intact, I think, is very valuable for these conferences. So let's take a look at the SEC. This is what it would look like if they took those 4 teams we lined up at the beginning of this video. Definitely strengthening their hold on their existing footprint and matching up some traditional rivalries. Again, potentially Miami doesn't make it. They go to the Big Ten, but I think you could see something very similar to this, not looking to expand quite as broadly as the Big Ten, really staying more regionally, which I think is good, and bringing some of those rivalries in-house. Of course, if they felt like it was an arms race and they had to match the Big Ten in terms of numbers, they could continue to pick up even more schools from the ACC, and maybe even the Big 12 and West Virginia finally getting the look it's always wanted. And then again, you just continue to add Louisville and Georgia Tech, which are existing rivalries, get some of their footprint up into Virginia and West Virginia as well. So the SEC also has options. I could see it growing and expanding a little bit, but still staying pretty regionally with schools that still feel more or less like a fit within the SEC, as opposed to the Big Ten really just kind of going to the other side of the country. So let's take a look at what this means for the Big 12. If they were to add those 4 schools, we'd said at the top of the video, those are some good brands, definitely strong basketball brands, adds to the conference's claim to be the top basketball conference. But because this isn't happening in a vacuum, we know the Big Ten would also be going after Pac-12 schools, which would make it much easier for the Big 12 to continue its expansion westward and pick up the Four Corner schools. But since the other 2 conferences are going to 24, they may as well too, and pick up the rest of the Pac-12 and probably a couple other schools. I think San Diego State and Boise State would make sense in a lot of ways. And then they'd have a truly coast-to-coast conference, give you a very strong foothold out west and through Texas. You're in Florida on the East Coast, and so a very strong setup. But again, because it's not happening in a vacuum, for the SEC to get to 24 schools will probably come at the Big 12's expense, and the Big Ten possibly taking Kansas, finally getting that call up, would come at the expense of the Big 12. And so all of a sudden, it's not looking as great, which reminds me of when BYU finally got the call up to Power 5, which they've been trying to get for a very long time. Went through one round of potential expansion with the Big 12, didn't get the call, and finally get it, but it's when the 2 biggest brands from the Big 12 are leaving. And so I think that's part of why the Big 12 is so excited to have both OU and Texas on their schedule this year, because it really puts them, even if it's only one season, on the same footing as those 2 programs. And and they're excited to have those matchups. So this would be a big bummer. So any Big 12 fans that are, excited at potentially seeing the Pac-12 or the ACC get rated and the Big 12 benefiting, yes, it's great. It would be fun to see the Big 12 do better, but I don't want to see it happen at the expense of these other conferences and losing them. Plus, it's not going to be all rainbows and butterflies, because we're going to see most likely if the SEC and the Big Ten continue to expand, it's not just going to happen in those 2 other conferences, that the Big 12 is going to take hits as well. And how funny would it be for West Virginia to finally have a chance to be in conference with Pitt, which is what they want, and then for them to get their dream to go to the SEC, which you'd have to take all day long. But they'd be, I'm sure, quite pleased with themselves to see Pitt in a reverse role and them being left behind in the Big 12. So anyway, not so great for the Big 12. There are some other options. Again, they could go for those remainder schools that we put into the Big East, Syracuse, BC, and Wake Forest, and probably have to go after a few other P5 schools at this point to fill it out to try to get to 24, Memphis and USF. So again, not nearly as sexy as it kind of looked like at the beginning of this whole exercise. So if you're a Big 12 fan, you might not want to be too excited to see the ACC get rated, because even though it may help add to the Big 12, I think it's going to cost more. So if schools are able to get out of the ACC grant of rights, where do you think those schools will end up? Do you think the conference will get rated? And do you think this means that we're going to super conferences? And is this something you even want to see? Do you want to see super conferences, or would you rather continue to see more regional conferences, or is that just a pipe dream at this point? Let me know in the comments below. Again, please be sure to like the video and subscribe and follow us for more content, and we'll see you next time.